Hello, and yeah, good morning, everybody. Even though for me it's a bit in the evening, but looks like everybody here it's a morning. Yeah, let's shortly look into Active Standby. But before we do this, short introduction into Amaze.io. We are a fully managed cloud and dedicated container hosting platform. We can host anywhere in the world, um, meaning that wherever you can start a server and we can install Kubernetes on it, which is pretty much any server in the world, we can host there. We pride ourselves in chat support, meaning that if you're a customer of us, you can directly chat to people like Ben that help you out directly if you have a problem, if deployments fail, and we don't do stuff via ticketing systems. Everything you're going to see today is completely open source. We do everything we do is completely open source. We believe in full transparency, and we believe that this makes much better systems for everybody to use, for people to contribute and make tools better together. And we have clients like governments, specifically the Australian government, that we host many, many websites, but also financial services, universities, medias, agencies, startups, and that all over the world. We are a completely global and remote company. So we have people in the US, Europe, and Australia to support and also help and provide 24 hours. Now, as said, we're using Lagoon. What is Lagoon? Lagoon is basically the build and deploy system that deploys your applications into containers on Kubernetes clusters. Basically, that's it. Lagoon has a lot of base images that allow you to take any services. Is it PHP, Nginx, Node.js, Python, that you can already use, and you just need to bring your code and you can deploy your applications into containers. So there's no need for you to first figure out how to actually run PHP performant in containers. That's already all there. Lagoon is the piece that talks to the Kubernetes API and creates all the different objects that are needed. A Drupal site that we're going to see today uses around 20 to 25 different Kubernetes objects that all need to be created in the correct order, need to be maintained, and Lagoon does all of that. So like with the base images, anybody that uses Lagoon, they don't actually need to learn the Kubernetes API or the YAMLs. You can if you like to, but there is no need for it. And then Lagoon also creates individual namespaces for each branch or pull request you create. That means that every single environment, which these namespaces are completely separate from each other. There's no way that ever a pod can talk to another pod in another namespace or things like that. And we do this for every branch and pull request, meaning that you can tell Lagoon to create new environments for every single PR or for every branch that you create in your Git repository, which allows for very modern workflows. But Lagoon doesn't only stop there. We go further. Like most of our applications that we deploy, like Drupal, they also need to run deployment scripts that do stuff like drush cache clear, drush updb, config imports, or whatever else you want to run. And we're going to see some of them today as well. And that's another good thing about Lagoon. You can write all these deployment scripts into your code, and it's going to run them automatically. And like I said, everything is fully automated and scriptable. Lagoon is completely API first. That means you have a GraphQL API that you can interact with and check how our deployments are doing, create new projects, create new environments. All of it is fully automatable. And we have many customers that integrate the API into their other systems and use them. If you want to learn more, go to amaze.io/Lagoon and you will find more information about Lagoon. But enough talking about Amaze.io or Lagoon, let's actually look into Active Standby. So like today, what we want to first look at, what is this actually blue-green deployment technology that so many tools are talking about? We're going to then look into, okay, how does actually Lagoon implement it? We're going to talk about the use cases for it, and we're also going to talk about the catches, because no system is perfect, and we want to make sure that everybody understands what the blue-green is really for and how it can be used. And then we're going to try a live demo. A couple hours ago, we did one. It worked perfectly. So without jinxing it here, I hope it's going to go again good. Let's hope the live demo gods are with us right now. OK, let's look at the blue-green deployments. So for us, a blue-green deployment is really just a traffic switch between two different environments. That means the secondary environment is already deployed up and running. So a deployment or a blue-green deployment doesn't mean you redeploy the environment a second time or again. This all happens before you actually do the switching. That means the switch itself, which is just a tiny change on a load balancer or on an ingress controller, means it can have a very, very small chance of an outage. The fact that something dies during that time is very, very, very small. And that also means end users should basically experience no impact at all. That means they're on the site, visiting it, and it doesn't get slow or it doesn't get weird, and just with 1 second to the other, they're suddenly on the new site that is deployed the new version. So that's what we see under a blue-green deployment. There are a lot of different other strategies. Some of them involve additional colors or what other not things. But we did a research with our customers. We went to our biggest customers that have asked for blue-green, and we looked at it and we decided, okay, we're going to implement it. We also decided to not actually call it blue or green, because during development within our team, we already realized that blue-green is quite confusing, which environment is which. So that's why we also decided, okay, let's call it active standby, because we believe that makes much more sense. Okay, so let's look at how does Lagoon actually implement such an active standby. So the first big difference that we implemented is you can now have 2 production environments. So far, it was only possible in Lagoon to have 1 production environment. Now it is possible to have 2 of them. And that means we have an active production environment. So there's a label now for one of them. That is the active. Active means it's the one that receives all the traffic. The production traffic is sent to that environment. And we have a second environment that is also production environment, but this one is called standby. And the standby is the one that stands by to be made the active when you tell it that it should be. And so these 2 environments are completely individual environments in Lagoon. They are not deployed into one namespace or multiple pods beside each other. They're completely different individual environments. That also means they're completely different namespaces. They cannot talk to each other. They cannot access each other's stuff. They're completely different environments like all other environments in Lagoon. And that also means they are built from individual branches within Git. So each of these environments have their own Git repository, a Git branch. And we did this deliberately because we really believe that only then the developers and the engineers have full control of what is deployed in which. So you have one branch that is the standby, and one of them is the active, and you just switch the traffic between them. And then what Lagoon does, when you tell it to switch, it just moves the traffic between one or the other. Now, because we understand that people still want to test specific environments, so you want to test the standby environment, so each of them then also get a unique test route, which you can use anytime to access and test everything. And then, like said, on the actual active standby switch, the traffic is just moved from the active to the standby. So let's look at this in a more graphical way. What we have here on this side is our environment called prod_left. Prod_left is created from a Git branch, also called prod_left. This is how Lagoon works. It creates the environment names based on the Git branches. In here, we have a Drupal, but this can be really anything. This is represented with an Nginx and a PHP container, a Solr, a Redis, and a MySQL database. This could be a standard availability, a high availability, it doesn't matter. Here we show a standard availability, but it doesn't matter. And it can also be a Node.js application, it could be a WordPress and whatever not. And then this environment currently has 2 URLs. One of them is the production URL, example.com. The traffic comes from the internet, and the Kubernetes ingress controller sends the data to the prod_left. This is how today environments also work. What also is already there today are these environment-specific auto-generated URLs that will always work. No matter if you have a production environment, a production URL or not, there is one always existing that you can access, that you can test. You can test production environment. So far, nothing has changed. Now what is going to happen? We create a new environment from the Git branch prod_write, and we call the environment prod_write. Again, you can see it has an Nginx, a Solr, a Redis, and a MySQL, exactly the same. They're completely separate from scratch. They're completely different pods. They have different storages. They have different permissions. They are just another environment. And like every environment in Lagoon, they have their own prod_write example amazee.io URL that can be used to access. Now, as this environment just came up, the database is most probably empty. So what is going to happen is during the deployment, the first time that Lagoon comes up, Lagoon and puts additional labels to these environments, because suddenly we have two production environments. So Lagoon needs to know and also needs to show all the engineers which one of them currently receives the traffic. So what Lagoon does, it gives the prod left, which currently receives all the traffic. This is the active. And we see the standby, which currently does not receive any production traffic. It only receives the specific environment URLs. This one is called the standby. So in this case, prod left branch, prod left environment is active, prod right environment is standby. Now, as mentioned, the prod right environment just has been created, and it doesn't have a database, and it doesn't have any files. Now, in some cases of blue-green or active standby, you would like to sync the database from the current active, because the standby is going to be the active at one point. So we want to have a fresh database synchronized over, and that is possible. This is not enforced by Lagoon. You don't have to do this. If you want to build another database, that's perfectly fine. But you can tell Lagoon every time that you deploy the standby environment, you go to the active environment and synchronize the database over and the files or something else, whatever you want to do. And then Lagoon continues with the post rollout tasks, and the post rollout tasks will run like cache clears, config updates, or whatever else you use in your Drupal site to update it. So that means you have the current database and the newest code, and Drush or whatever deployment system you use and will update the environment prod_write to the newest version. The traffic, though, is still sent to the prod left. That means all the cache clears and all the really heavy work happens on this side without any traffic receiving. And what we see a lot of times that this actually makes the deployments much faster, because cache clears, for example, with Drupal are quite slower if you still have active traffic. Now in Drupal or Lagoon will finish the deployment. And after it is finished, it will do nothing more. It will tell you, hey, I deployed prod_write, I copied the database, I did all the post rollouts, and done. Now it's the task of the engineers to check if the prod_write works correctly. So they will use this URL, visit the environment, and check, is everything correct? Did it behave correctly? Did the deployment correct? Do I expect all my changes on it? And only then the switch is triggered. So the switch is not something that happens automatically after the deployment is done. The switch is completely separate from the deployment. Any Lagoon user that has the permission can go to Lagoon and do it either in the UI or via the API and trigger a switch. And what Lagoon then does, it goes to the Kubernetes ingress control and tells just that thingy here and touches nothing else. It doesn't touch the database, it doesn't touch the files, it doesn't touch any commands. All it does, it tells it, hey, switch the traffic to the prod_write environment, which is now the active. So Lagoon does two things. It switches the traffic and it switches the labels. That's it. It does nothing more during this switch. Like I said, no database changes, nothing at all. If you realize a couple of minutes in that something is not good with the prod_write environment, all you can do, you can trick another switch, and Lagoon will put traffic back to the old active environment, and the site will work like before. Again, no additional tasks run, no database syncs, nothing. It's just a switch between these two environments. So what are the use cases for this? I already hinted a bit. This can totally be used to just regular deployment processes. We see, especially really big sites that have a lot of traffic, during cache clears, they get into quite a hard state that they can almost go down just when running a cache clear on a production site that has a lot of traffic. In the case of the active standby, all the cache clears and all the really heavy duty stuff is happening on environments that don't have real traffic, making the deployments faster, much safer, and less worrying for everybody. It can also be used to do significant content on an existing site. We have many customers that do yearly updates of really big updates on their websites. And what this means is they can now create a standby site. It synchronizes over from the master environment and leave it there for some time. Can be days, can be weeks, could even be months, that they go in and change whatever they want to change on this standby environment. There can be multiple people working it, multiple editors, there can be audits done, there can be reviews with stakeholders. You can even deploy multiple times in it if you need to change something. And then when you're happy with the environment, you can switch the traffic over and you launch your new version of your website without a problem, without hassle, without people at the same time editing a lot of nodes or things like that. The other thing is the rollback. Like we saw before, at any time when you realize something is not good with the new environment, you can just go back. You just send a switch command because the old environment that used to be the active, which is now the standby, has not been touched at all in any case. The database is still there, the files are still there. Another possibility you can do, you could also have a placeholder site. You could switch over to a little site that just says, hey, we're currently deploying. Then you have all the traffic removed from the production environment. You can do all your changes, and when you're done, you can switch back. It will be a totally legitimate deployment system. And then what we also see is customers, sometimes they really want to go live at the specific time because it is somehow connected to, let's say, some budget releases or really important, or like stock traded companies, they need to publish times, or they need to publish content on specific times. That's fully possible because you don't depend on any DNS updates or running another deployment, because all you do is just switch the two different environments. And the really cool thing is, because they're actually completely different environments, the standby environment could be a completely different product. You could go from, let's say, Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 with a Gatsby front end, or you switch from WordPress to Drupal or whatever. They're completely different environments. They don't need to have the same containers or services deployed in any way. Now, there are also some advanced use cases. We suggest that maybe let's play with the regular ones first if you want to do this, but one of the features we implemented is we have also URLs for the standby environment. So while in our example before, example.com always points to the active one, you could also have standby.example.com that always points to the standby environment, and they also get switched between the two different environments. And that's really good for editors. For example, if your editorial workflow says you always go to the standby environment and edit text there and then you switch, that's a possibility. And they don't have to remember which one is currently active. So they just always go to the standby URL and do their stuff there. You can also synchronize content between the two environments. So if you do like this long-term content editing, you could constantly take over content from the current active to the standby, or vice versa, whatever you want to do. There's full support for tools like Drupal deploy and stuff. Plus, it's also possible to use the Drupal environment indicator or other toolings that exist out there to show in a better way which of the environment is currently active and which one not. Okay, so it all really sounds great, but there are a couple of catches, and we want to make sure that we shortly talk about them because it's really important to understand what they are. First of all, and we talked a bit about this, is already the databases are not automatically synced. It is something you can configure, but it needs to be done. So it's something whoever builds the blue or uses the active standby system needs to think about, what are our deployment systems? Do we want to synchronize the database every single time, only the first time? There's a couple of decisions that need to be done, but we can totally help. We have done this now a couple of times with customers, so we saw a couple of use cases. The next one is that you have two parallel databases for some time. That means if you have websites, like a transactional website, where e-commerce things or contact submissions happen, when you sync from the master environment to the standby environment, the database, as soon as it is synced, you have two databases. And then if something changes on the active while you're doing changes on the standby, this will not be synchronized anymore unless you trigger another sync. But this is not done automatically by anything. So you need to be aware that if you have e-commerce on the active still running, and then you switch the traffic over, if let's say a user added a new product to the cart, it will, and it has not been done on the standby yet, it will not be there anymore. The same for contact for web forms or things like that. And so that's something that we really need to understand is we either keep the time really, really short or we find other ways. And there are other ways how to handle these cases, and we're happy to help with them. But it's important to understand that there are two databases. What is really good, though, if you switch, the old database is not deleted in any way. You can still go in there and you could see like if there was a web form submission or something like that. But it's just important to understand that there are two databases for some time. Then we talked about the editors. Experience shows that sometimes they're a bit confused by the URLs. We think, though, with the standby URLs, that is not a big issue. And then if you are running on the Amazee.io cloud, you're creating a second production environment. And for us, from an infrastructure point and platform point of view, this is a completely new production environment that needs monitoring, databases, backups, resources. So it will add an additional small cost if you run on the Amazee.io cloud. But there are ways, again, to handle this. The standby environment doesn't need to run all the time. You could start it and remove it again, then it only costs while it actually runs. We charge on the hour, so that's totally something that we can handle as well. And one question that we had as well is, as of right now, both environments need to run on the same cluster. There are ideas that we could also do this cross-cluster, but right now, Lagoon only supports it on the same cluster. And that's going to be it for now. As mentioned, though, there could be ideas with a CDN and so that we can also do this between clusters. Okay, now you say, this is all great, give it to me. So as of today, we have early access for all Amazee.io customers, and that's the dedicated or the cloud. If you're interested in it, you can start using it today. We also have some documentation that explains some more how it exactly works and how to configure all the different things. This one will also be done available today. And if you want to use it, talk to our support team, and they will help you figure out, because we need to know some information from you and also how to use the active standby. So they will help you. If you're not a customer yet, reach out. We're happy to create a demo project for you so you can play with it, move sites around and stuff like that. All right, Toby, do we have any questions so far?
We got one question so far, and that's, is there a Lagoon CLI command to sync from active to standby?
I think we can hand that over to the Lagoon CLI maintainer, Ben.
Yeah, so there is no functionality in the CLI to handle synchronization of content or databases. I'm not sure if that would be something that would go into the CLI, because each environment gets a dedicated Drush alias as well. So if it's Drupal that you're trying to synchronize, then you can use the Drush aliases. So you'd get a Lagoon production alias and a Lagoon active production and then standby production aliases that you can use to synchronize between the two. And they will always point to which, so if it's the Lagoon active alias, then it will always point to the environment that's active. So we might have to create tasks in the UI that could do that synchronization, but all the existing task synchronization features in the UI and in Drush should already work as long as you're using the aliases. If you're going between two different products, then you need to work out your own way to synchronize the databases or anything. But between Drupal, yeah, you've got Drush. Hopefully that answers.
All right.
There is another question.
Go ahead.
And this, whether we can, whether you can promote a standard non-prod, so a development environment, to be a standby.
It's not. It's possible, but not suggested.
Yeah, it would definitely need some support help, I guess.
Yeah.
It is possible to do, but it's not a very straightforward process. Depending on where the site is running, there'd be additional work required to actually promote it to a production environment. It just depends on which cluster and where it's running.
So largely we've tried to keep this active standby workflow separate from the promote workflow that was present in other parts of Lagoon.
But it should be able to work together. So yeah, it's, if this is an interest, yeah, I'm actually, and I think there's another question in there, like, is it really about the promotion piece, or would they like to use an existing branch that is a development environment and now make it a production environment? Because that's also possible. But again, I think it's easier if you come with a completely new branch that did not exist before in Lagoon. It's just going to be much easier, or the experience is going to be much better.
And once we get into a more Kubernetes reference architecture, there'll be the likelihood that development and production sites are hosted on different clusters. So promoting a site from a development cluster to a production cluster is almost a cluster migration. So we've got to be really careful about the workflows we put in place there.
Correct.
Yep.
All right, let's go
to
the demo. Ben, take it away.
All right, we'll just get the share going. Hopefully everyone can see the Lagoon dashboard here. So this is my...
I was going to say, if you're interested in playing around at home, I'm just going to post the link for the website, so you can watch it change live in front of your eyes. If I can work out to use Zoom.
Yeah, so this is my my active standby demo environment that I've got running. You'll see that I've got the two production environments running here. One is prod left, which is the current active environment, and the other is my prod right, which is the standby environment. Both of these have their in auto-generated URLs. So this is the prod left one. So this is my current prod left site, and this is my current prod right site. So this is what I want to change it to. But the actual live site here is demo.shreddedbacon.com. So you can actually go and have a look as this happens. But what I want to do is actually promote my prod right site here or switch it to become the active production site. So there's a couple of ways to do this. There's via the UI, which you can click this button, and there's also via GraphQL. So I'll do the mutation first. So this will actually trigger the task. So it'll spit out a remote ID. So if you're using the Lagoon CLI, so the Lagoon CLI will be able to do this in the future as well. And it will return the remote ID, which you can use to follow along the process of the task using the CLI. So, but once that's triggered, it'll create this task. So you can see it's active at the moment. So what it's doing at the moment is actually talking to the underlying cluster. So it'll either be an OpenShift or Kubernetes, depending. And it's telling it that it needs to start to switch the routes between the environments. So this can take a little bit for it to actually tell the cluster what to do. But once it's done, we should get an update in here to say, yep, so it's succeeded, and it's told us that it's completed the route migration, and these are the routes that it's moved around. So if we go to our production site now, we should see in a sec that it's now showing my prod right site, which is my fantastic super site that I've written that tells you about agile frameworks. And I don't like this site though. So what we'll do is actually switch it back, but you'll notice now that the UI is showing the prod left is the standby environment and prod right is the active environment. So we can actually go into here and have a look. Also you'll see that there's in the environment overview pages, we've got labels here that show that the environment is a standby environment, and there's also the section here that shows you the routes that would be associated. So production also has the same labels, which will show the routes that are associated to the environment. But we'll trigger the switch now back because I don't like that site, and it'll pop up a confirmation box in the UI. The mutation doesn't prompt for a confirmation because it expects that you obviously know what you're doing. But in the UI, it will ask you to say, it'll say that you're moving, the current environment, which is prod right, and you want to replace that with the prod left. So we'll click the button, and this will actually take us automatically to the task page where we can see the task progressing. Again, it creates that, and then it creates the task within Kubernetes or OpenShift, and we can monitor the progress. And it shouldn't take, it's usually once the task is created, because it's got to go through the task processing inside of Lagoon first. And then once that's completed, again, it'll tell us it's completed and which routes were actually moved. So it should be nearly finished. So it's succeeded. The logs haven't come through yet, so it's probably still checking the status of the actual job. Cool. So now, yeah, we can see that the active routes and standby routes, if you had them. So now if we refresh the page, we'll see that it's back to the old site. And the original auto-generated URLs will always remain, and they'll continue to point to whichever prod left or prod right. They won't actually change which site is viewed. Yeah, that's pretty much the demo.
Cool, thank you. All right, we go back to our short presentation. Yeah, demo recap. So we saw the unique URLs that each of the environment had, even though we switched back and forth. It still had the same. We saw the production URL, and that switched the site automatically. We saw the active switch via the GraphQL API, and also we saw the switch via the UI. Yeah, so that's what we have for you. We all hope you're all excited as we are, because this was quite a big project that took a bit for us to figure out how to do it. But it's now here. And yeah, if you have more questions, we're happy to answer them.
I've got one more question in the list, and that's if you want to enable basic auth on your standby but not your active, are there environment variables, or is there something we can key off in a to be able to enable basic auth on standby?
Not right now. The specific idea of the standby environment is that if you switch it, that it does not do any changes of the environment. So the switch itself does not trigger a redeployment, it does not create new environment variables, it doesn't remove them or anything, because any of these actions could cause some issues with the standby environment, which we want to prevent in the first place. What is totally possible though is you can deploy into the standby environment and have a basic auth in it. Then you can deploy again, you can deploy again, and deploy again with basic auth enabled. And then you do one deployment that you remove the environment variables, and then you do the switch. So that means that the standby environment would maybe be accessible via basic auth, without basic auth for a couple of minutes after you deploy, and then you do the switch. So it is possible, but it's not supported by the system that it automatically removes them when you run the switch. So it's something you need to manually do right now. And so, yeah, but we believe that with just another deployment, that you remove the basic auth, you check shortly is all still working correctly, did nothing else break, and then you switch them over.
Have we got any final questions before we wrap it up for the day?
Toby says everybody can go home now. Oh, we already home.
We're already home. I won't force myself to do the whole make up a question because no one else did thing that hosts managed to do. So yeah, I think that's probably a wrap from the questions from the crowd.
All right, I think that's it. Thanks everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
And yeah, thanks so much for coming. We really enjoy doing these webinars and connecting more with the community. There's a lot of features coming out from Lagoon in the next few months. We've been working very hard behind the scenes on a lot of things, so we'll tee up more of these webinars as we go through to demo more of them to you. And likewise, if there's stuff that you think you'd like us to walk you through, let us know, and we'll make Ben do it.
Yeah. Webinar as a service.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.